Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, the executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. We have several different topics tonight that we've collected over the past year, and we thought we'd share with you for this holiday season. Please stay tuned. We'll feature also Randy Baier, my colleague, and as we discuss various books.
Box Office Archaeology by, well, let me get the full author name here for us. Edited by Julie Shablitsky from Left Coast Press. Refining Hollywood's portrayals of the past. And what they're looking at here is they call the archaeology of media. Looking at the media display, the advertising, the whole thank you. I was looking for marketing. The marketing of movies in the past, but also the kind of where are these images from movies, these stereotypes? Where do they come from? For instance, is there a historical kind of truth or some kind of actual event that you can go back to and find out, and how does that get translated into the actual movie making and of course the marketing of the movie? So, for instance, you know, the Mummy movies, and then there's a chapter title in here called Vikings, Vixens, and Valhalla: Hollywood Depictions of the Norse. A pirate's life for me, but what did that really mean? In other words, what was a pirate's life? You know, what was the life of a pirate historically? You know, in the Caribbean or whatever. Also, a thing on the Titanic. What's the truth about the Titanic? And so, Pocahontas, unanimated, the life of a Powhatan princess, and so on. The very interesting book, and they look at. There's one chapter that discusses the Western boom towns, and the media sort of parallel here is Bonanza, the TV show Bonanza from the 60s, of a real town, Virginia City in Nevada. And so they go back and look at the archaeology, meaning, okay, Virginia City now is what do you call it? Not dug it up in the sense of from underground, but they renovated Virginia City from the ruins of the old boom town, the old mining town. It's now a big tourist place in Nevada. You can go there and, you know, go to your bed and breakfast and whatever. But how truthful was life in Bonanza TV to what the real Virginia City was? And they've discovered that Virginia City was actually an interesting, in a certain way, multi-ethnic town. I mean, obviously people were there to... It
wasn't this simplistic media representation.
Exactly, right. And of course you could sort of say that right off the bat, the difference between, you know, the book, the novel and the movie, or real life and the movie. But the archaeology of it is really fascinating, how they sort of look at what the real history was in terms of daily life in these places. Hollywood's version of Chinatown, for instance, and this one. It's a really interesting book. So, Box Office Archaeology, a look at the movies and history mixed together. This is called Sexing the Teacher, School Sex Scandals and Queer Pedagogies. Sheila L. Kavanaugh, produced by, is this Duke? No, this is the UBC Press, University of British Columbia.
One of the cases she talks about in here is the Heather Ingram case, which is an older, teacher who then has sex with a student. Mm-hmm. We just have a case that just came out in the Detroit area just within the last couple of weeks, same thing. And the point she's making, it's one thing if a man does it,
if it's a male teacher and a female student.
That's handled one way, but when a woman does it, they seem to even land on him even more. And this Heather Ingram case was, I think, in British Columbia. And they really went to all kinds of measures to really destroy her, and so there's this troubling thing. I think that's what's attracting as far as queer studies about an excessive response. There's no doubt that you cannot, under the law, in terms of ethics, have sex with students, but still there is this catastrophic response that is, gender-based.
Yes,
I think that's what she's trying to deal with.
Well, I was, just in terms of the popular media attention to some of these cases, I think in the case of a man having an affair with a female student. But there is this equation immediately with rape, legal rape, with the male teacher, female student. And yet, it's not interpreted in quite the same way if it's a woman teacher and a male student. And I guess it's not equated immediately in the public sense, in the sort of sensational media aspect that picks up if it's female, female, and male, male, or whatever the other gender sort of patterns, you know, you could come up with. So I believe the book here looks into these perspectives and tries to come up with some sort of fuller discussion. You can tell from the chapter titles. The one on Heather Ingram, for instance, is called, I don't quite know the case, but Erotic Discipline, Eros, Aggression, and Maternal Pedagogies in the Heather Ingram case.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, I don't know
Well, if you look at
what is a maternal pedagogy, for instance. This would be interesting to look at.
Well, if you look at teaching as the sort of benign, asexual, you know, professional, whatever, if you look at gender as a constructed position or performance, I think that's what you're talking about. Well, then, before we've looked at a teacher in the pedagogical performance as being neutral, asexual. They're not supposed to, and that's what the book is about. Once it turns sexual, now people are having a whole lot of trouble with this. Even though these people certainly were male, female, or whatever before, now they're attempting to understand this. All of a sudden, these people are sexual, and that seems to just sort of really just churn up the waters in a community. There's also because the media always looks for blood in the water, this is one of those kind of sensationalistic, catastrophic moments where the media seizes on this and rides it for all it's worth. And then you start wondering, well, what is going on here? And then you start wondering, well, there is an element of bias, this gender-based.
Yeah.
What is happening?
Now, I see in the meantime you've picked up another one.
Yeah, Civilizing Women. And it's by...
Symbolizing or
Civilizing Women.
Civilizing Women.
British Crusades in Colonial Sudan by Janice Body. It's really interesting.
Now, this is another book that has a two-word title with a multiple meaning pun.
Yeah,
like Race Matters, or something like that. Right.
Civilizing.
Right.
Part.
So it's women who civilize, or
in that context,
or civilizing of women.
Well, it's the role that women have had. This again, we seem to be talking about silencing or the unobserved.
Right.
Their role in this rather controversial, very controversial element, and taking a look at the practices, including female circumcision and genital mutilation, and what they were trying to do. In other words, they were trying to civilize these barbaric practices, and it's really pretty interesting.
From the point of view of the West,
right?
Whereas in some ways, I'm sure there was some kind of reaction that perhaps we may have our own barbaric practices that we need to sort of be putting into question as well.
But it's another version, and what I find interesting is because Sudan is kind of coming into, it's more, there's some horrific things going on there now, but to start taking another more informed look at what was going on from a perspective that isn't as well known, from that of women. And
these women were probably the first to start making it known publicly. That
people like Hills Young Beasley and Lillian Sanderson, and educationalists, as they said, who fought to end female circumcision long after 1956, and it still is going on. I mean, it's a horrible practice. So I think they kind of take that as an ongoing metaphor. She says allegory, but a practice is one of the ways of interpreting the cultural conflict, in trying to figure out what's going on. And this whole issue of the attempt to colonize women's bodies in northern Sudan, and the Sudanese, like they said, consciousness writ large, and how it was a contradictory, subtle, but eminently practical process. So But then having someone talk about it from that standpoint really helped. So we've had some really dreary, well, I wouldn't say dreary, but substantive things. So I thought maybe you might enjoy taking a look at this one.
From the dangerous to the sublime.
That's right.
Or the sublime in the not in the full sociological sense, but just sublime meaning wonderful,
Fun. Just
fun. When champagne became French. How wonderful. Wine and the making of a national identity. Oh man, they've got this great late 19th century Champs-Élysées, poster. Pure champagne. A look at how foodways can certainly be underscored or underscore nationalism.
Well, it's a bit fluff. I mean,
Yeah.
it is.
But it's
fun
an academic. I mean, this is done by a sociologist or a historian.
Yeah.
The winner of the Gourmand World Cookbook Awards for English wine, best wine history book, and the best book on French wine, the Cliquot Wine Book of the Year, explains how nationhood emerges by viewing countries as cultural artifacts, a product of invented traditions. Colleen M. Guy is an associate professor of history at the University of Texas at San Antonio.
But the big issue, when they talk about it in here, is can wine of that type be called champagne if it's grown any other place than the area in France?
And the method, there's also this method of making the
it's
wine.
called, can you call it champagne?
Well, technically you're not supposed to, right? Isn't there a legal definition?
They're enforcing this on the California wine growers because they say, well, some of our plants have come from France.
But to say
it's technically French.
It's such an oxymoron to say California champagne.
Right.
It's sort of like shrimp scampi or something. I mean, it's like or it's actually the opposite of shrimp scampi.
But if you talk to the French,
scampi.
This is tantamount to whatever.
Yes,
this is the ultimate crime.
But of course, this is so true because, we have such in our popular imagination of France, the French are such super nationalists to Americans in general.
But this goes to the core.
This goes to the core.
Soul.
This is great. Listen, I have to tell you, I recently read an article, this wonderful article called "Get Ready for." It was in the Guardian. Something like "Get ready for Europlonk." Plonk meaning just everyday basic wine. Plonk. It's just I don't know if you know the term, but plonk just means
that's what they do when they scrape the thing dry.
Well, just pick up some plonk. You're going to say, I don't care. Just pick up some plonk, which means something like Gallo wine, a $3 wine, just whatever's daily wine that's cheap. So the thing is now, based on the European Union, winemakers are allowed to mix wine from different countries, not just within, say, Spain or Portugal or Italy. You can now have Portuguese wine claiming it's Portuguese wine, but can take grapes from Italy and mix them together. And this is an enormous, economically, what it's done is it's supposed to compete with, say, California, Australia, other wine areas that are coming on strong, especially Australia, South Africa, because they do mix wines a lot. I mean, the American wine industry has wonderful wines, but a lot of them mixed. And this is really cutting to the core of the sort of purity of the European, of nationhood around wine. Italy,
That's what's
Portugal,
so delightful
Spain.
about this book is because we say, oh yeah, champagne, I know all about it. Well, no, you don't.
That's interesting.
And it's just like anytime you're talking about something that people regard as, center to their existence. No. Every nuance has its enormous significance.
Exactly.
They're willing to go to war over this issue.
They do indeed. Well, we're beyond plonk in this book. Wow. Beautiful.
This Yale has just these wonderful, extraordinary books.
The title is on the painter Aaron Douglas, African American Modernist, put out by Yale University Press. This wonderful poster for freedom on the back, just looking into the stars for hope. It's fantastic. Yale, actually, you're right. Yale has the Center for British American Art. This obviously is American, but the study for British American art, the study of, they've got wonderful collections of African American art, and they're having these fabulous exhibits at their museums and coming
It's
out with
stunning. I mean, and the
fabulous
artwork
books.
in here
Yeah.
is just fabulous. It just
this is to me just
the use of
off
color.
the top.
Is well.
Yeah, fabulous use of color, and also we're looking at a picture here called "Aspects of Negro Life: Song of the Towers," which has to do with both music and construction. And there's this wonderful. Maybe you can show this when we put the video together. The sort of layers of shadow coming out in a series of concentric circles here that sort of point right into the center. It's beautiful construction. And right off the top of my head, I wonder if Aaron Douglas is a contemporary of Rockwell Kent, but I wonder if they knew each other and had any influence together, or if there was any kind of a sharing between the two of them.
My impression, it was just fabulous. In looking at this, there is this aesthetic, this sensibility, this mentality that, you know, I was aware of it, but not until I saw it in this book and they brought it together. And also that they had these different conferences and conversations back and forth. And it's really elegant. I mean, it's very, very nicely done.
A core painter of the Renaissance, the Harlem Renaissance, and also in terms of the American tradition, one of the greatest American painting traditions is the painting of murals, which of course was big, you know, because of the New Deal era, the 30s,
Right.
late 20s, 30s, 30s,
But I wasn't aware of the extent and the magnificence. I mean, you like locally we have John Anai Lockhart, but his sensibility is quite parallel to this, and he's working on the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington. But there is this interesting sharing of vision and color, use of color and conceptualizing that I found fascinating, that I didn't realize had this breadth and depth to it. And so it was. So I thought it'd be a wonderful addition. But I can't praise Yale University Press enough for taking on these subjects. Because one of the things is, in terms of memory, is if someone doesn't do this, then we're losing the aspect.
Exactly, which is the call of the artist. Well, the big feature in this book is a series of murals at Fisk University called The Negro in America, and it's a series of murals across above doorways and so forth throughout, and it does exactly that. It's creating a collective memory of African American life and history.
Well,
so thank you. What a treat.
we got this book, Brutes in Suits, Male Sensibility in America, 1890-1920 by John
Fabulous.
Pettigrew. It's hard to say. I like these kind of things because they're just a lot of fun. But are men truly predisposed to violence and aggression? Is the biological fate of males to struggle for dominion over women and vie against one another endlessly? That's kind of like all these manly, you know, the manly studies thing. And
Well, the short answer is yes, right?
yeah,
Ultimately,
but
but then now you have a 500-page book that looks at the long answer.
Well, it's trying to differentiate, and you know, what is rugged individualism in the hunting and killing genre,
Right.
you know, popular men's literature. And I guess underneath it all, how much is the environment really shaping the expectation of gender activity?
Yeah.
And he has things about brute fictions, and I'd certainly nominate all of Hemingway's work for that stuff, you know. But there is this acting out element, and he was talking about, you know, Tarzan. You know, that's an example of a brute fiction.
Right.
That you overcome everything because of how strong and you swing through the tree. It has no basis in fact whatsoever.
And it's a Western importation. I mean, Tarzan is a kid who comes about from a plane crash, so he's like some Western kid, who gets, you know, grows up, becomes king of the jungle, you know.
But see, underneath that,
Takes over the jungle.
To me, that whole characterization is the Western man conquering.
Yeah, the metaphor.
Not only is the exotic other, but in the exotic other's environment.
Right.
And overcoming it easily, and all the animals are his servants.
And it's interesting though, because we have figures, Dr. Dolittle. I mean, I'm just coming up with pop culture. Mowgli from Rudyard Kipling. You know, the child who lives with the animals. Sorry, the book just escapes me, but Mowgli's his name. And then, of course, Tarzan. So, on the other hand, we have this fascination with maybe having control over the animals, but learning. I mean, in all those cases, they communicate, talk, and learn from the animals and become these kind of protectors. But ultimately, I guess the animals look to the human to be the one to ultimately protect them, even though on the good side, the sort of ecological side of the story, these characters are learning from the animals. And then they grow up, and the animals know they have to sort of, send them, they're now an adult, they have to live in the human world or something of that nature. These things come along. So on one level, it's a metaphor for sort of, Western world dominance of the animal world or of the primitive. But on the other, they learn and become part of that world in order to become a better person. I mean, I'm looking at it from the best point of view as I can, I guess.
This isn't any kind of fabulous rationale for masculinity, but it is looking at, it's kind of a prickly examination of what has happened and how what we've done has shaped and formed. For example, you think about the Marine Corps spirit, a few good men make the difference and all that kind of thing, and what he calls the U.S. warrior class, which is kind of scary. And then he also talks about the irony, instinct in war, and he quotes political theorist Harvey Mansfield, who said, "Thinking is by itself a challenge to the superiority of manliness." So there's just laying
Thinking,
down the
that's
challenge.
the brute, right? Literal brute, like from the
That's the
French or the Latin. Yeah.
Because he says the first principle of this study is that masculinity is undone by mindfulness. And I thought that's just brilliant.
Yeah, that's really true. That's very true.
And where does that leave us? Because in terms of war, is war in this insane version of masculinity,
but
which needs war to survive.
It's true, but we have so many contradictions within that. I mean, even within the warrior class, the brute is not recognized necessarily as the best warrior. I mean, in our own culture, we praise the Eisenhowers and the Bradleys and the summa cum laudes from West Point and the thinking generals and things of that nature. I mean, we still sort of treat them as something beyond the common soldier, if I can put it that way.
But isn't that the final irony, is that the very thing that a society or culture promotes? And you would think that the most extreme, wonderful example, the most complete representations of that would be the most desired, are not, in fact. And that the fact that he's calling these people brutes, in other words, unthinking, hyperactive kinds of automatons, is not something that's to be desired. In fact, he says the idea of masculinity as a disease ought to be taken seriously. Anytime this kind of
as a type, as a kind
hyper masculinity.
Yeah, right. Right. Beyond,
and that great care should be taken to isolate it from any force potentially more powerful than ourselves. In other words, we don't want a hyper brute putting the finger on the button for launching all kinds of weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, sure.
Because of the destruction come about.
Right.
So, in the very introduction, he says the de-evolutionary turn in U.S. masculinity. So I don't know. I thought it was a lot of fun.
Brutes and suits.
This next book, Beyond the Black Box, The Forensics of Airplane Crashes, with George Baier, it's kind of, well, it's not kind of, it's really interesting. I mean, I don't like flying, but he talks about all the technical things that go on with planes, including burst engines and reliability. But it's the forensics of this, which I found really fascinating. And it's more than pilot error. There's, and when you think about some of these planes have taken off and landed thousands and thousands of times in the 20 or 30 years they've been in the air, was just scares the pants off me, frankly.
Right. That's true. And especially in this week where stress analysis, I'm referring to the bridge collapse in Minneapolis, stress analysis is on the front page. I mean, and it affects every aspect of our modern life. I mean,
But isn't that a
airplanes,
key-
roads, bridges.
But isn't that a key factor in using technology? What's the acceptable obsolescence rate?
Right.
And
The efficiency. I mean,
Yeah.
there's the economic, unfortunately, the cynical look of it is that at what point do we tolerate tragedy or some collapse before we actually fix it? And, in terms of this bridge, they were saying it
Civil
was
engineers-
structurally deficient but not ready to repair yet. I mean, there was that
yeah, on
balance.
a scale of whatever it was, it got a 4 out of 9.
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't that kind of less than majority?
Yeah, you'd
know?
think.
And the
but
civil
then-
engineer, I think because they've never had that happen to this magnitude. I mean, it was the internet, expressway,
Interstate, yeah.
access to Minneapolis.
Right.
They had never had a bridge just fall down like that.
Right.
Now, what was interesting in my reading of that is the underlying structure of the bridge was deficient. It was an old metal stress, which means it was supported from, in bridges, more modern bridges or bridges more thoroughly done, they had redundancy.
Other ways to
They'd have
one
cables that
section.
would hold it up, and so.
Right.
But this was literally true that once it started, it just collapsed. It was like a domino effect.
Right. Right.
So.
In this book, he talks about. It's interesting. Things happen. Crashes, failures, happen as a series of improbable. How did he put it? Improbable events that combine together, which by themselves would not cause such a tragic accident.
Yeah.
Or an accident, but and these were particular events that were not necessarily foreseen. In other words, there are, say, 5 simultaneous events, not each of them not considered a total failure, but in the adding them together, they create the makings of a total breakdown.
Well, in the bridge thing, it had a profound structural deficiency. They were repairing it. And remember, it's carrying a load that it wasn't, I'm not sure that it was supposed to be carrying 140,000 cars a day or whatever it was.
Well, the load had increased over the years.
And there's this vibration thing. And then they were drilling on it to repair pavement. So on a bridge that already had deficient, and it was a bridge that all it took. Thank you for watching Rip Rap Again. This program is our 120th program that we've done over the past 10 years. We started out with Community Television Network, CTN, and they're getting ready to move to their new headquarters, and we're getting ready to go on the internet even more extensively. So stay tuned here and on the internet at riprap.org. We'll see you there.